New piece for the New York Times titled, MAGA's Birthright Meltdown is in full effect. You wrote about why the MAGA base is so upset about the Supreme Court ruling to uphold birthright citizenship. Parts of the right still posture as patriots, but they have imagined a different kind of patriotism, one that loves the country but scorns its creed. They, like Musk on July 4th, reject the classical liberal founding, or at least de-emphasize its importance compared with the ancestral lineage of its citizens. And if America isn't rooted in its creed, and if certain classes of citizens have a superior claim to their American identity than other citizens, then it is a short trip to believing that the American government exists to serve only the favored class, the real Americans who make up, say, the MAGA base. In this formulation, true patriotism isn't the preservation of the creed, it's the preservation of the people. And once you see this distinction, MAGA's entire governing philosophy makes infinitely more sense.
Well, it also goes, David, against 250 years of American history. It goes against the fact that we are a nation of immigrants, that our founders desperately were trying to figure out how to get more immigrants in. A lot of the people that were in the first Congress were immigrants. And so you have, and especially these latest creeds, which have just been so disingenuous, so dishonest. Either that or they're just extraordinarily ignorant and stupid about American history. You had people melting down over a constitutional amendment that became part of the Constitution in 1868. And over 100 years of firmly established precedent. And then you take all of that ignorance, all of the brushing aside of everything that Ronald Reagan ever stood for, all of the brushing aside of what conservatives ever stood for, and the cherry on top was when they needed a striker to beat Belgium, Donald Trump and the whole MAGA right got involved and lectured us about not being against helping this striker who was only on the team because his mother from Britain couldn't fly home because she was too pregnant. He grew up in London, and yet he was an American because birthright citizenship. So they're for birthright citizenship when it serves their purposes. They're for immigration when it serves their purposes. They're against immigration when it does not.
Exactly. And I think the thing, and we've been seeing this unfold for a while, is there's been this attack on the right on the notion that America is a creedal nation. Not long ago, I interviewed Justice Gorsuch over his new book about the American founding, and he made this statement very clearly in our interview: America's a creedal nation. And by that, we're not bound together by blood and soil, we're bound together by an idea. And this has never been controversial in conservative circles. I mean, Joe, the idea that would have been controversial, say in the Tea Party era, what are you talking about? Of course we're a creedal nation. The creed is defined in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution. We're a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That's the Gettysburg Address. And so these creedal documents define who we are. But now parts of the right, we're flipping out over birthright citizenship because they're moving more towards a defining America on the basis of blood, not an idea. How long were you here? You know, J.D. Vance has said that people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War have a greater claim to America. Well, you know, look, I'm proud of my...
I mean,
it's crazy.
It's stupid, David. David,
yeah.
Listen, I'm sorry, we're going to have to do Faith on Friday right here. Because let me tell you, the thing that I love about America, and that we're a nation, a creedal nation, is what I'm so drawn to about the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the fact that we grow up reading and understanding that the ground at the foot of Calvary is level and it's for everyone. And Jesus tells a parable to bring this point home, the parable of the workers, those who came early in the morning getting angry that those that came late at night working because they got paid the same. And it was Jesus' way of saying, hey, wait a second. What are you complaining about? If you are a believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ, it doesn't matter when you are a Christian. It's the same thing with America. My family, I think we've lived here about 400 years. You know what I love about that fact? I love about that fact that today, somewhere in America, somebody is raising their right hand and agreeing to that creed, and they're every bit as much of an American as me. Now, some people, that may freak some people out. For me, it reminds me of the gospel. It is an extraordinary expression of who we are as a nation, and I can't understand why there are people like J.D. Vance who hate that.
Well, you know who would agree with you, Joe, is James Madison. I mean, as I point out in my piece, in 1785, he's writing against a religious establishment in Virginia. And he talks about it, he says that religious establishment, this authoritarian top-down sort of Christian nationalism, would harm that policy, which he says is trying to attract people from all nations and all faiths, so that they'll add to the number and to the luster of our nation. And where does he root this argument for inclusion in this American dream? He roots it in his Christianity. He says that the establishment, that a contrary policy would diffuse the light of Christ. And so what we're talking about here is, Joe, exactly what you were saying is, you know, we have a lot of arguments about the faith of the founders and is America founded as a Christian nation. But one of the reasons why we have been historically inclusive and historically open to people from all nations and all faiths is because of faith-based arguments from the founders, not unlike the one that you just made.
You know, Peter Baker, this discussion is really valuable to listen to because it teaches us so much about what's going on in our lives today in the United States of America. This country is weighed under by, I think, cynicism brought and directed and produced in Washington, D.C. And yet there was a snapshot, many snapshots of this country over the past 3 or 4 weeks of the crowds of foreigners and the crowds of Americans mixing together in American cities, thrilled with the World Cup, thrilled with each other, giving a whole new view from the people who came from around the world who Americans really are, and giving Americans a really nice picture of people who love being in America. But I'm wondering from your point of view, because sometimes you write, not sometimes, most of the times you write very insightful pieces rooted in Washington, D.C., which is the capital of cynicism. And you wonder whether or not the people who live and work in Washington, D.C. understand the true meaning of America.
Yeah, it's a great question because this issue is so fraught with contradictions, right? This is, as you say, a country that at the moment is cracking down on people who weren't born here. We don't want people who were born here to become citizens. At the same time, we're welcoming the world for the World Cup and celebrating that. The contradictions are so numerous. Think about this. We have a president who is the son of an immigrant, right? His mother was born in Scotland. 2 of his 3 wives are immigrants, came here from other countries, and many of their families joined them. And I think that, they wouldn't qualify under J.D. Vance's, theory of Americanism because his ancestors did not fight in the Civil War. Does that mean Donald Trump is less of an American than others? Of course not. But the contradictions are so fraught. The idea that this is about illegal immigration, which is the way it was originally sold, I think, of course, has now been shown not to be the case. It's actually about immigration much more broadly because they have not just gone after people who are not authorized to be here. They've tried to change the rules about who is authorized to be here. They've tried to go after people who are here legally, who have done things correctly, but they're changing the rules on their status or they would like to change the rules on birthright citizenship. So it is more about culture. It's about the idea that America is somehow not what it once was, and we're missing out, and people are coming here and taking over.